Virginia, August 1943. The ship groaned against the Norfolk dock, as if it was tired of carrying other men as scenes. 14 days at sea had turned the cargo hold into a single, sweating organism of fear. German prisoners stood shoulder to shoulder, backs to metal, boots spread for balance every time a wave slapped the hull. The air was thick with breath, rust, and the sour memory of vomit. They had been told exactly what waited on the other side of the ocean. Starvation, torture, cages in the desert, Americans with dead eyes, and easy cruelty. Propaganda reels had shown it in grainy black and white. Prisoners on their knees, hands tied. The stars and stripes looming over them like a verdict. Klaus Müller had watched those films with clenched jaw and a chest full of resolve. Better to die on your feet than crawl to an enemy like that, the officers had said. Now, pressed into a dark steel box with hundreds of other men who smelled like fear and salt. Klaus was not sure if he believed in anything except the next breath. Someone above shouted. Boots hammered on iron steps. The hatch began to turn. Light edged the circle. It swung open with a grinding squeal and dawn poured into the darkness. Men flinched as if the sun itself might be a weapon. Auf den! Auf den! An American voice shouted, clumsy German wrapped around a drill field tone. You go. Now. Go. Go. Klaus's legs trembled as he moved toward the ladder. His hands closed around the cold rungs, and for a second he could feel the whole war in his grip. The first day of training, the first bombardment, the first friend he'd watched bleed out in a ditch. He climbed. Salt air hit his face like a slap. It was hotter than he expected, heavier, and full of something he had almost forgotten existed. The smell of land. The smell of green. He blinked hard as his head cleared the hatch. The dock was wide and gray beneath the ship. Wooden planks washed silver by years of waves. Lines of American MPs waited below, rifles on their shoulders, helmets low. A crane creaked somewhere to his left. Seagulls screeched overhead, circling, waiting for whatever scraps war might leave them. Beyond the dock, Virginia rose in layers of color that didn't belong to his idea of war. Trees thick with leaves, undamaged warehouses, smokestacks that pumped work, not destruction. A sky that was just blue, not sliced apart by contrails and sirens. He had braced himself to see ruin. Instead, he saw normal. Behind him, the column shuffled forward. A guard tapped his boot with a baton. Not hard, just impatient. Move, Kraut. Let's go. Daylight's wasting. Klaus stepped onto the gang. Every nerve in his body screamed at once. This was the moment the horror stories were supposed to become true. The rifle but between the shoulder blades, the kick to the knees, the barking orders in a language he barely understood. He reached the bottom of the ramp. The MP closest to him did not hit him. The man yawned, actually yawned, like this was just another shift, just another Tuesday of herding enemies off ships before breakfast. He checked his wristwatch, frowned at the time, and muttered something under his breath that sounded more like annoyance at the schedule than hatred toward the prisoners. Another MP cracked a joke Klaus couldn't understand. They both laughed. Laughed. No one spit at him. No one screamed. No one raised a rifle. Klaus took a slow breath and tasted something else under the salt and wood and oil. Freshness. It felt brunk. Friedrich Hahn emerged onto the ramp behind him, thinner than when they'd boarded, eyes sunk deep in his skull. He followed Klaus's gaze past the cranes, past the warehouses, to the city beyond. Shall? Friedrich whispered. Look at the roofs. They're all still there. Klaus stared. In Stuttgart, roofs were a memory. Streets were canyons of rubble. He had seen entire blocks flattened, churches turned into blackened skeletons. He closed his eyes briefly and saw again the glow on the horizon, the pillar of smoke, the screaming that came after the sirens. Here, windows gleamed. Bricks stood straight. No shattered glass glittered in the gutters. Ships moved in the harbor with calm efficiency. Workers shouted to each other in the lazy tone of men who assumed there would still be a tomorrow. The dock smelled like work, not desperation. "Move it along," another guard called, this one in better German. "Form a line. No trouble. No problems." Years of training snapped Klaus's spine straight. He fell into formation, boots thudding on the planks. The line snaked toward a cluster of tables set up under canvas awnings. He expected a pit, barbed wire, dogs. He got paperwork. An American clerk sat behind a folding table with a stack of forms and a mug of coffee. Wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose, and his sleeves were rolled up, showing thin forearms and ink stains on his fingers. He frowned at the list in front of him as if it personally offended him. "Name," the clerk said in slow German as Klaus stepped forward. "Klaus. Klaus." The man gave a small, distracted nod. "Miller?" he repeated, flattening the sound without asking permission. His pencil scratched across the page. "Next." A slip of paper was pressed into Klaus's hand a few stations later. A new number, different army, same idea. They took his photo, flash flaring in his eyes. They inked his fingertips and rolled them onto cards. An American with freckles and a camera said, "Don't smile," in English, as if that were a real danger today. It was clinical, efficient. No shouting, no slaps. The absence of abuse felt like its own kind of threat. They were herded again, this time toward the far end of the dock, where black lines of train cars sat waiting. Klaus saw them and felt his stomach drop, but not for the reason he expected. These weren't cattle cars. They were passenger cars, long, dark green, with rows of windows and steps that folded down neatly to the platform. Gold paint along the side spelled out a word he recognized but knew the type. A company name, not a unit number. For a heartbeat, the line of prisoners just stopped. An MP barked, "Keep it moving." No one obeyed. Men who had been shoved into wooden boxers and shipped like livestock across half a continent now stared at cushioned seats through glass. Silence fell heavy. Ottowar's voice broke it. "This is wrong," he whispered. "This is for people, for normal people." Friedrich took a half-step closer to the car, his hand lifting without permission, fingertips brushing the cool metal. "In Germany," he said quietly, "I rode to the front in a cattle wagon. 50 men. 3 days. 1 bucket in the corner. No seats. We took turns standing so others could sit on the floor." He swallowed. "We rode to kill in worse conditions than they are shipping us to captivity." The realization hung in the air, too heavy for anyone to contest. "Up," an MP said in German. "Softer. Now, get in. It's a long ride." Klaus climbed to the steps. The interior smelled faintly of dust and old fabric, not sweat and terror. The aisle ran between rows of seats, blue upholstery, faded but intact. Sunlight slanted through open windows. Air moved. He put a hand on the back of the nearest seat and pressed down. It gave under his fingers. A cushion. Springs. Forgiveness for bones that had learned only hardness. He sat. His body didn't know how to relax. He perched on the edge of the seat as if it might break or be snatched away. Around him, men slid into place, eyes darting, hands touching armrests and window latches, testing reality. A memory flashed in his mind. A hospital tent in France. Wounded men lying on stretchers on the floor because there weren't Hug cuts. Officers had beds. The rest had whatever ground was left. If beds were for officers, Klaus thought numbly, what does it mean when enemies give them to prisoners? The question made him feel like he was coming apart at the seams. The car filled. The door clanged shut. MPs took positions at each end, rifles on their shoulders, straps Gassois. One of them, a young man with a crooked nose and sunburned neck, walked slowly down the aisle. His gaze moved over the prisoners. Not cold, not kind, just assessing. He reached Klaus's row, dug into his pocket, and came up with a pack of cigarettes. He held them out. The gesture was small. The impact was not. Klaus stared at the white cylinders like they were bullets. His mind flashed. Film reels, stories, whispered tales of American tricks. Take the cigarette, fall over dead. Take the kindness, pay for it with humiliation. The guard saw his hesitation. He shrugged, plucked one out for himself, and put it between his lips. He flipped open a metal lighter with a practiced thumb, flame blooming in the cup of his hand. He inhaled, blew smoke toward the ceiling, then extended the pack again. "Here," he said in English. "You smoke. War's over for you, buddy." Klaus didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Tired, not triumphant. He took a cigarette. Otto did too, his hand shaking despite himself. The guard leaned in and lit both, then moved on, offering the same uneasy grace to the next row. Klaus drew in the smoke. Real tobacco, not the bitter sawdust mix they'd been fobbed off with in ration packs, not the scratchy leaves some sergeant had traded in a village. Smooth, rich, heavy on his tongue. He closed his eyes. It shouldn't be like this. Every kindness felt like a trap. Every gentle gesture felt like a rope disguised as ribbon. Fear had taught him to find hate in every shadow. Now he was being asked to see something else, and his muscles didn't know how. The train jerked. With a low, steady grind, it began to move. Outside, the dock slid away. Cranes passet, then warehouses. Then the last glimpse of the harbor. The train curved, and suddenly there were trees. Endless, impossibly green trees. Fields lay wide on both sides of the track. Cows grazed, heads down, tails flicking lazily. Farmhouses stood with their roofs on, their porches straight. Laundry moved in warm wind, white sheets billowing like surrender flags that didn't belong to any army. He saw a car parked next to a gas pump, with only 2 people in line behind it. No desperate crowd. No guards managing ration coupons with guns in their hands. A small house flashed by, close to the tracks. In the yard, children played some kind of game with a bat and a ball. Shouts barely audible over the rattle of the wheels. One boy looked up, squinting, eyes catching the movement of the train. What right do you have to wave? He thought. You marched under a flag that flattened cities like this. You helped build the war that made other boys dig for their families under ruble. The boy kept waving until the train carried him out of sight. Friedrich leaned over the aisle, voice low. Do you remember the films? He asked. Klaus didn't look at him. Which ones? The ones they showed us in training, Friedrich said. The Americans with knives. The prisoners on their knees. Better to die than be captured by them. Remember. Klaus remembered the room, the projector's hum, the officer pacing the back row with arms folded. He remembered the knot of fear they'd all pretended was rage. I remember, he said. They lied, Friedrich whispered, about everything. Klaus wanted to argue. He wanted to hold on to something, anger, certainty, pride. But the window showed him another undamaged church, steeple stabbing a sky uncut by bombers. I don't know what is true anymore, he said. Then maybe, Friedrich said, we finally have a chance to find out. The words sank in like a stone in water. Shock had carried Klaus off the ship. Now something new slid in under his ribs. The first hints of doubt. The afternoon wore on. Heat pressed in through the windows. Sweat slid down Klaus's spine. But the moving air kept it from becoming the suffocating stew of the troop trains in Europe. When the car grew too quiet, an MP clapped his hands once. We stop soon, he said in rough German. Water, stretch, no running. You run, we shoot. Don't run, Nobody shoots. It was the closest thing to a threat they'd heard all day. When the train finally squealed to a halt at a small station, they were led off in organized groups. The platform boards were warm under Klaus's boots. A few townspeople watched from a distance, curiosity in their faces, not hate. The station door opened. A woman stepped out. She wore a plain dress, hair pinned back, a tiredness in her posture that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with long days. She carried a wicker basket covered with a checkered cloth. She spoke briefly to one of the MPs. He shrugged, said something back, then gestured her forward. She walked to the nearest group of prisoners, hand lifting to peel back the cloth. Sandwiches. Stacks of sandwiches, white bread cut in triangles, ham and cheese and a curl of lettuce between the slices. It looked like something Klaus had last seen on a poster in a bakery window, not in real life. She held one out. To him, his throat closed. Every story he'd been fed collided with the sight. The enemy did not feed you. The enemy starved you. The enemy made you crawl in the dirt for crumbs and laughed while you did it. "You must be hungry," she said in German. The words thick with accent, but clear enough. Klaus could not make his hand move. Somewhere behind him, Otto made a wounded noise. His hand shot out, quicker than his brain, fingers closing around bread as if it might vanish. Klaus remembered something he'd seen once, near Kharkov. A Soviet prisoner crawling toward a crust of bread someone had thrown into the mud. A German guard had let him crawl, let him reach, then kicked the crust into the ditch and walked away laughing. He stared at the sandwich in front of him and waited for the kick. It didn't come. The woman's arm did not shake. She did not pull back. She just stood there, eyes lined, gazed steady. Klaus took the sandwich. The bread was soft. He could feel the give of it between his fingers. He lifted it slowly, so slowly, to his mouth, like any wrong move might reveal the trick. He bit. Ham. Cheese. Butter. Real butter. Tears burned behind his eyes so suddenly he almost choked. Otto stood beside him, already eating, tears cutting tracks down dirty cheeks. His shoulders shook not from sobs exactly, but from some internal collapse, as if a pillar that had held up his anger had simply given way. For a moment, the platform was silent except for chewing and the distant clank of railwork. If they treat us like humans, Klaus thought wildly, then what have we been pretending to be? The whistle blew again. They. The train pulled away, taking them deeper into a country that had, in a few short hours, done more damage to their certainties than any artillery barrage. As evening fell, the heat turned heavy, and shadows stretched long across fields. Klaus's muscles ached with a tiredness that felt different from the front, the kind that comes after a long day of trying not to feel anything. He wasn't sure when he dozed. He only knew that when the train began to slow again, the sky outside was bruised, purple and orange. He sat up, rubbing grit from his eyes, and looked out. Fences, towers, long wooden buildings in straight rows. A camp. Barbed wire glinted in the last light. Guard towers rose at the corners, soldiers visible as silhouettes against the sinking sun. His heart rate spiked. Here is where the stories become real. They lured you with bread and beds. Now comes the real America. The train rolled past a sign. The letters meant nothing to him, but the guard at the front of the car translated in a half-mutter to his friend. "Camp Hearn," he said. "Lucky bastards." Could have been out in the desert instead. Lucky the word felt obscene. They disembarked onto a gravel yard. The Texas heat wrapped itself around Klaus like wool soaked in hot water. It was different from European heat, full of something alive, heavy and stubborn. He looked at the camp. The buildings were new. Clean wood, straight lines. The fences stood, yes. The wire coiled, yes. But he had seen German camps thrown together with less care for their own soldiers than this place seemed to have for its enemies. An older prisoner ahead of him stumbled as he climbed down. His knees buckled. He pitched forward, momentum carrying him, toward the gravel. An American hand shot out and caught him. A Sargi. Helmet tipped back. Fingers rough, but sure, steadied the man. "Easy," the sergeant said. Gotcha. No shove. No insult. Just a human reflex. As natural as breathing. Klaus stared at the hand on the old man's arm until the sergeant guided him upright and let go. It should not be confusing. It should be simple. Enemy equals evil. Ally equals good. But nothing today had obeyed that rule. He followed the line into a long building that smelled of fresh-cut pine and antiseptic. Shirts off? Someone called in German? The room beyond was a medical space. Tables, white cabinets, a basin where a nurse rinsed metal instruments. A doctor in an American uniform moved from man to man, stethoscope glinting, face lined, but not hard. Klaus stood when it was his turn. The doctor pressed the cold disc against his chest, listening to lungs that had breathed trench gas and cordite. He checked his throat, his ears, the reflex in his knee. His fingers paused at the puckered scar on Klaus's shoulder. This was shrapnel? The doctor asked in German. Yes. It should have been stitched, the doctor said. You'll have a bad scar. He cleaned the old wound anyway. The alcohol stung like truth. His hands were efficient, practiced, the same way any doctor would be with any soldier, until the uniform didn't matter. He wrapped it in fresh bandages, neat and tight, and made a note on a clipboard. Report to the infirmary tomorrow, he said, handing Klaus a slip of paper. We'll check the healing. Klaus took it. You. The word stuck in his throat. He cleared it. You don't hate us? The doctor looked at him for a long second. I hate this war, he said. The rest, we'll see. He moved on to the next man. Outside, twilight had deepened. Electric lights flickered on in the barracks windows, casting rectangles of soft gold onto the dust. Klaus walked toward one of the long buildings, nerves taut as wire. The door stood open. He stepped inside. Rows of beds ran down both sides. Metal frames, mattresses, white sheets, a pillow at each head, a folded wool blanket at each foot. The floor was swept. The air smelled faintly of soap. He stopped so suddenly the man behind him bumped into his back. Beds, not straw in a corner, not dirt, not a patch of floor if you were lucky. Real beds in long, identical lines. Otto walked past him, reached out, and pressed his palm down on the nearest mattress. It dented under his weight. He made a sound that was too close to a sob to be anything else. They're giving this, he whispered, to us. Friedrich sat slowly on another bunk, testing it like a man sitting on ice over a lake he wasn't sure would hold. I don't hate him, Klaus realized, with a sort of numb shock. I don't know him, but I don't hate him. That scared him more than hating ever had. After 20 minutes, the truck turned up a dirt road toward a farmhouse. The land around it was an ocean of cotton. White bowls dotted the plants like snow that only fell waist-high. A wind moved through the field, making it ripple. A man in a sweat-darkened hat and dusty work clothes waited, thumbs hooked in his belt. He watched the truck approach with the steady, measuring gaze of someone who'd spent his life judging clouds and soil. The truck stopped. The prisoners climbed down. The man spat, then nodded once. I'm Curtis Whitfield, he said to the MP, who translated his introduction into rough German. This is my farm. You work, you get paid, you cause trouble, you go back with nothing. Understood. Men nodded slowly. Curtis scanned their faces, his gaze lingering on Klaus, Otto, Friedrich. You boys ever picked cotton? Curtis asked. Blank looks all around, he sighed. Didn't think so. He walked to the edge of a row, gestured. Watch. He showed them how to pull the bowls without shredding their fingers, how to keep from uprooting the plants, how to move sideways down the row in a rhythm that would spare their backs. His hands were quick. Sure. Then he stepped back. After 10 minutes, his hands hurt. But the work didn't feel like punishment. It felt simply. The plant either surrendered its cotton, or it didn't. The back of the truck was loaded with baskets and metal thermoses. Curtis waved the prisoners over as if waving over hired hands instead of enemies. "Come on," he said. "Food's getting cold." "What?" he asked the MP. "You boys never seen lunch before?" Curtis snorted. Klaus held the lemonade glass with both hands. Sweet, tart, cold. Hot afternoons, stolen apples, laughter that hadn't yet learned to shrink at sirens. Curtis watched him. "You speak English?" he asked. "A little," Klaus said haltingly. "From school." "Where from?" Curtis asked. "Stuttgart." Curtis nodded, as if that meant something, even if it didn't. "My boy's in France," he said. "Fighting your lot, I reckon." Klaus's throat tightened. "I am sorry," he said. Curtis shrugged. "Not your fault personally," he said. "Wars belong to politicians. Boys just get used up in them." He finished his sandwich and stood, brushing crumbs from his shirt. "Back to work," he said. "Cotton won't pick itself." The MP translated again, but the tone didn't need translation. As they walked back to the rows, Klaus felt a strange hollowness inside his chest. He had been ready to die, fighting Americans who were supposed to be demons. Instead, one had just given him lemonade and blamed the war on politicians. "Who am I?" Klaus thought. "If my enemy agrees with me that this is madness." Back at camp that evening, the routine continued. Roll call, dinner again, hot and heavy. Men wrote letters at long tables, leaning over paper with borrowed pens, trying to fit an indescribable day into guarded words that would pass censors. Klaus lay on his bunk, staring up at the slats of Friedrich's bed above him. It was impossible to sleep with his mind howling. Images flickered, the boy waving at the train, the woman with the sandwich, Curtis's sunburned neck, lemonade beating on the glass. If they treat us like humans, he thought again, why did we behave like monsters? He didn't mean the uniforms, or the salutes, or even the orders. He meant the thoughts, the ease with which he'd absorbed hatred, let it fill the spaces where Dow should have gone, the way he'd cheered when their artillery hit a city, because that meant someone else's mothers would be in basements instead of his. Fear taught me who to hate, he realized. Kindness is teaching me who I am. He didn't know yet which lesson would win. He only knew the new one hurt more. Days turned into a pattern. Work crews left in trucks each morning, some to farms, some to lumber yards, some to projects inside the camp. Others stayed behind, mending fences, cleaning latrines, building new barracks. In the evenings, after dinner, notices went up on a board. Classes: English, mathematics, agriculture, carpentry, even philosophy, for anyone foolish or desperate enough to try thinking their way out of the ruins. Friedrich signed up for everything. "Thinking got us into this mess," he said. "So maybe thinking can get us out." Otto signed up for English. "I want tea. Let the only words I know in this language be orders shouted at me," he said. Klaus put his name down for agriculture in English, almost by accident. If he was going to work in these fields, he might as well understand them. If he was going to be surrounded by this language, he might as well know when someone was cursing him or blessing him. The first English class was taught by a woman in her 60s, who walked into camp with a leather handbag and the unshakable authority of someone who had run a classroom for 40 years. "I am Mrs. Campbell," she said, writing her name on the board. "You will speak better English than my husband by the time I am done with you." The men laughed, uncertain. She smiled like she had just been handed a class of schoolboys, not enemy soldiers. She corrected their pronunciation with patience. She made them repeat simple sentences again and again until the words set right in their mouths. "I don't hate you," she said once, when Otto stumbled over a phrase about home. The words lodged in Klaus's chest like a splinter he couldn't dig out. Some clung even tighter to the old stories. The old loyalty they whispered in corners, scowled at anyone who took American classes or worked too hard on American farms. They called Curtis's lemonade poison, Mrs. Campbell's grammar lessons brainwashing. They carved swastikas on bed frames and watched, waiting for someone to betray the group. A prisoner named Hugo Krusta, interpreter, the one who had volunteered to help communicate between guards and inmates, was found beaten half to death in the yard outside his barracks. He'd been attacked by his own countrymen. They left him in the cold dirt because he'd spoken too well to Americans, laughed too easily with them, corrected other prisoners when they spouted party slogans. Hugo died 6 days later in the camp infirmary. The Americans were furious. Investigations. Questioning. Transfers. Suspected Nazis separated from the general population. For Klaus, Otto Friedrich, the lesson was sharp and simple. The night after Hugo's death, the barracks was quieter than usual. Beside him, Otto whispered. If our own are willing to kill us because we learn their language, Otto said, then tell me, Klaus. Who is the monster now? Klaus didn't answer, because every answer hurt. 1 week later, they lined up in the yard for a head count. It was cold by Texas standards, breath puffing in faint clouds. A thin sheet of frost clung to the edge of the water trough. Klaus wrapped his arms around himself as they waited for their numbers to be shouted. A young American guard moved down the line with a clipboard, checking faces against numbers. When he reached Klaus's row, he stopped, frowned, and checked something off. The guard's hands were chapped. He rubbed them together, blew on his fingers, then glanced up at the men. I don't hate you, he murmured to the older guard beside him. In English, I just want this damn war to end before it eats everybody I know. Klaus didn't understand every word. He understood enough. He watched the young guard walk away and felt something inside him shift again. Shock had cracked his certainty. Fear still whispered, telling him not to believe any of this. American reactions kept answering that fear with something else. With boredom instead of brutality. With sandwiches instead of starvation. With teachers instead of tormentors. And in the quiet hours, on his bunk, with the Texas wind slipping through the cracks in the barracks walls, Klaus began to realize something he would never say out loud. The hardest prison to escape was not one made of barbed wire. It was a story he'd been told about who he was and who his enemies were. And that story, here in America, was finally under attack.
Spring 1944 crept over Texas with a subtlety Klaus had never seen in Europe. There were no victory parades, no speeches echoing through streets, no banners, just a slow greening of fields, a softening of the air, the return of insects at dusk. The cotton stubble gave way to new planting. Birds became louder at dawn. Inside the camp, another kind of season was changing. At night, men now argued not about when they'd be executed, but about whether American bread was better than German bread, whether Mrs. Campbell's homework was harder than the exercises their old teachers used to assign. Some still grumbled about propaganda, but fewer listened. Routine had woven itself so deeply into their lives that it almost felt like a kind of peace. Almost. One afternoon, after months on Curtis Whitfield's farm, Klaus found himself alone in a row of young cotton plants, the sun high but gentler than in August. Curtis walked up behind him, boots crunching softly in the dry soil. "You work hard," Curtis said. Klaus straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Work is easier than thinking." Curtis nodded like he understood that in his bones. "You ever thought about staying?" Curtis asked. Klaus blinked. "Staying where?" Curtis gestured around them. "Here, after the war, America." The idea hit like a blow. "What?" Klaus said. "Impossible." "Why?" Curtis asked. "You're learning the language. You know the land. When this is over, these fields will still be here. Gonna need all the help they can get. My family is in Germany," Klaus said. "My mother, my sister, my city." He trailed off because the image that came to his mind was not Stuttgart as he'd left it, but Stuttgart under bombs, the way he'd seen it in Allied reconnaissance photos and heard it described in rumors.
Your city won't be the same, Curtis said quietly, as if he'd read the thought. Cities never are after men like us finish fighting over them. Klaus swallowed. How can I stay in the country that imprisoned me? Curtis gave a humorless little laugh. You think you're the only one in a prison? He asked. You're in a camp built of wood and wire. Most of us are in camps inside our own heads. We just don't see the fences. He clapped Klaus on the shoulder. Think about it, he said. Doesn't have to be hell after this. Not for everybody, eh, Walk? Walked away, leaving Klaus standing in the dirt with his hands full of cotton and his head full of new cages. That night, Klaus lay awake, Curtis's words replaying in his mind. Stay. The word pulsed with temptation and guilt. From the bunk above, Friedrich's book rustled. You're moving, Friedrich said. Thinking. Yes. Dangerous habit, Friedrich muttered. What about? Curtis asked if I would stay, Klaus said. Silence. Then Friedrich sighed. He asked me to, he said. Klaus turned his head. What did you say? I told him I did not know, Friedrich said, which was the first honest answer I have given anyone in years. Klaus stared into the dark. If we stay, he whispered, we abandoned our families. If we go back, we abandon this proof that we were lied to. That is the problem with truth, Friedrich said. Once you have seen it, everywhere feels a little like betrayal. The next day, English class was packed. Mrs. Campbell brought newspapers. She rolled them out on tables. Pages spread wide. Photographs of battlefields. Maps with arrows. Columns of text in a language the men were only just beginning to be able to read. Today, she said, we learn the words you have been fighting under. Words like invasion and casualties and surrender. The men leaned in. Otto picked through a paragraph, lips moving silently as he shaped the English words. His finger tapped under a sentence about air raids over Germany. He frowned, then looked up. My city, he said. Munich. Bomb. Heavy. He translated clumsily for Klaus and Friedrich. The room's energy shifted. Old loyalty stirred. Old pains resurfaced. Mrs. Campbell watched their faces. Does this make America the devil? She asked, slowly, carefully, in English. Because we bombed your cities. No one answered. She nodded, as if they had. And when your country bombed London, was that different? Say, ask it. Klaus remembered newspaper photos he'd seen before the censors became stricter. London in flames, buildings cracked open like eggs, civilians sleeping in tunnels under the city. We were told, Otto began, then stopped. What were you told? Mrs. Campbell asked. That they deserved it, Otto said, because they were enemies. Because they were weak. Because Germany was strong. Mrs. Campbell's gaze soft. And now? She asked. Otto swallowed. Now, he said slowly. I see. We are not stronger. Just not bombed yet. When we left. Mrs. Campbell nodded. War is a factory, she said. It produces two things in great quantities, graves and lies. Sometimes it is hard to tell which is which. She paused, then pointed to another article. Now, she said briskly, we learn the word armistice. It may be relevant sooner than you think. The months blurred. There were small joys. A soccer game in the yard with a ragged ball. A letter from home that survived the long, censor-filled journey. A joke that translated well enough to make both Germans and Americans laugh at the same time. There were small cuts, too. The news of Hugo's murder lingered like a bruise. Certain men were transferred out, sent to segregated camps for hard cases. The swastikas carved into bed frames were sanded away, but memory kept their shapes intact. On Christmas Eve, 1943, the camp chaplain, a Catholic priest from Boston named Hayes, held a service in a simple wooden building. Klaus went because he didn't have anything better to do, not because he believed. The room smelled of pine boughs someone had hung at the front, a clumsy attempt at decoration. Men sat on benches, shoulders touching, the air thick with the unspoken fact that they were all still alive to see another December. Hayes spoke about peace, about a child born into an occupied land, about hope sneaking into the world in the least military way possible, about enemies who, in another life, might have shared a table instead of a battlefield. Afterward, as the men filed out, Hayes stopped Klaus with a hand on his arm. You have family, Hayes asked, switching to careful German. Yes, Klaus said. Mother, sister. In Stuttgart. Hayes smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. I'll pray for them, he said. Klaus almost laughed in his face. You'll pray for Germans? He asked. I pray for humans, Hayes said. Nationality bores me. He moved on before Klaus could respond. That afternoon, trucks rolled into camp loaded with boxers. Curtis climbed down from one of them, grinning under his hat. Other farmers came too, men Klaus recognized from distant fields. They had brought blankets, socks, cigarettes, candy bars wrapped in crinkling paper. For the boys who worked our fields, Curtis said when the MP asked. My wife would skin me alive if I didn't bring them something. Klaus received a wool blanket and a pack of American cigarettes. Merry Christmas, Curtis said, squeezing his shoulder. War can't stop there. Klaus nodded, throat tight. Danke, he managed. That night, wrapped in the new blanket, smoke curling from the end of an American cigarette. He looked around the barracks at faces, lit by the dim yellow bulbs. You realize, Otto said from the bunk across, my father is probably eating a thinner soup than we ate tonight. My mother too, Klaus said. Friedrich stared at the roof. The party told us we were superior, he said. And yet, here we are, being fed by those we were supposed to conquer, while our people dig through rubble for potatoes. He shook his head. If there is a God, he has a very dark sense of humor. January 1944 came. News filtered in through papers, through American radio broadcasts. The guards didn't bother to hide anymore. The Eastern Front shifted. The Allied bombing intensified. Italy changed colors on the maps. Camp life remained, almost obscenely, the same. One gray morning, a rumor spread. A prisoner had refused to go out to work. When the MP reached his bunk, he found the man sitting rigid, eyes hard. I won't help them, the prisoner said. I won't pick their cotton. I won't build their barracks. Let them rot. Let them rot, the MP shrugged. Suit yourself, he said. No work, no pay. No pay, no canteen. Your choice. The man stayed. 2 weeks later, thin and sullen, he signed up for work again. I thought I was punishing them, he told Hans. In the yard. I was only punishing myself. Klaus listened. How many times? He wondered. Had he proudly suffered, thinking he was hurting someone else? By spring, the camp felt like a city of suspended lives. Every man there had a before, a home, a job, a dream. And an imagined after in some distant, blurry future. The present was strangely gentle. For a prison, beds, food, classes, work that felt more like labor than punishment. But under it all, like a bass note under a melody, was the knowledge that the real world was still on fire. One afternoon in April, as they walked back from the fields, the MP riding in the truck with them Miller, from Ohio Latte, a cigarette and passed the pack around. Klaus took one, cupped his hands around the lighter as Miller flicked it open. He inhaled. Not so bad, is it? Miller said, gesturing at the fields, the camp fence in the distance, the broad sky. Klaus looked at him, at the rifle across his knees, at the easy slouch of his shoulders. What? Klaus asked. Prison. Being alive, Miller said. Could be worse. Could be where my brother is. Italy. Mud. Bullets. No fried chicken. He blew out smoke. You boys got it good, he said, not unkindly. Good as war allows, anyway. Klaus wanted to object, to remind him that fences and numbers and stripped uniforms weren't good. But then he thought of Italy, of the Eastern Front, of Stalingrad. He closed his mouth. I don't hate you, Miller added suddenly, almost as if he needed to say it before he lost his nerve. I don't like you either. I don't know you. I just want this thing to be over before it eats everybody I know. Klaus stared at him. You sound, he said carefully, Like me. Miller laughed once, short and surprised. Yeah, he said. Funny how that works. He looked back at the road as the truck rolled on. That night, Klaus wrote a letter. Not to his mother. Not to his sister. To himself. He wrote in German, because he did not yet have enough English to tell the truth, that precisely. He wrote about the first day on American soil, about the sandwich, about the bed, about the hot water on his back, about Curtis's lemonade and Mrs. Campbell's homework, about Hugo's death at the hands of men who feared words. At the end, he wrote one sentence that came out in a strange mix of both languages. On my first day in America, I expected to be shot. Instead, I was given a pillow. He folded the letter and hid it in the lining of his pillowcase. Years later, historians would ask him to describe Camp Hearn. They would expect stories of cruelty or indulgence, of ideology or betrayal. What he remembered most, even then, was not any one event. It was the slow, daily erosion of hatred, not a dramatic explosion. More like the way water, given enough time, can carve its way through stone. May 1945. The news came first through rumor, then through radios, then through the official announcement pinned to the camp notice board in 3 languages. Germany had surrendered. Hitler was dead. The war in Europe was over. The yard filled with a buzzing that was neither celebration nor grief. Men clustered in tight knots, some expressionless, some pale, some shouting at no one in particular. Klaus stood in front of the paper with the translated announcement, eyes moving over the words that had been unthinkable 3 years ago. Unconditional surrender. He didn't know what to feel. Relief tasted like failure. Failure tasted like survival. Behind him, someone laughed harshly. So, a bitter voice said, we lost after all the sacrifices, after all the speeches. Friedrich answered without turning. We lost the day we made monsters out of everyone who wasn't us, he said. This is just the paperwork catching up. Letters began to arrive from home, each one a shard of a broken mirror. Klaus received one from his mother, written months earlier, finally catching up to him now that the world had stopped rearranging itself for battle every week. She was alive. His sister was alive. Their house was not. Stuttgart is ruble, she wrote. We live now on your uncle's farm. We share one room. We eat when we can. She did not ask if he was eating well. Maybe she didn't do one to know. Another letter came weeks later, confirming what rumors had already whispered. Entire cities gone. People living in cellars, in ruins, in barns. We stand in line for hours for bread, if there is bread. He looked around the barracks. Beds. He woke with his heart pounding and a taste of grease in his throat. The war was over, but their captivity wasn't. They had expected release, ships home, a quick return to whatever was left. Instead, President Truman decided they were still needed. America's factories had to shift from tanks and shells to tractors and refrigerators. Its men were coming home, some in boxers, some not at all. Fields still needed harvesters. Roads still needed building. The prisoners stayed. They kept working, kept eating, kept sleeping on beds that were beginning to feel less like gifts and more like obligations. The camp thinned slowly. A group left in late 45, another in early 46. Names were called. Men packed their few belongings to extra blanket. The letters, the scraps of paper with addresses scribbled on them. Every departure day felt like a graduation and a funeral at the same time. One crisp morning in August 1946, Klaus's name was on the list. He stood in formation in the yard where he had once lined up expecting cruelty and now lined up expecting he didn't know what. An American captain walked along the line with a clipboard. When I call your name, he said, You step forward. You board the truck. This is your journey home. Halmdeward felt heavy enough to bruise his ribs. Friedrich Hahn, the captain called. Friedrich stepped forward, books tucked under his arm instead of weapons. He glanced once at Klaus and then toward the gate, as if half of him still didn't believe it would open. Ottore, the captain said, mangling the pronunciation. Otto swallowed, stepped forward, shoulders tight. He looked like a man walking toward a verdict, not a village. Klaus Muller, the captain called. For a moment, Klaus couldn't move. His boots felt nailed to the earth. All the years telescoped at once. The first day off the ship, the first night in a real bed, Hugo's broken body, Curtis's lemonade, Mrs. Kemble's chalk on the board, the letters from home, the news of surrender. The captain met his eyes. You don't have to want to go, the captain said quietly, in careful German. You just have to walk. Klaus exhaled. He stepped forward. At the gate, they waited beside the trucks. An MP walked down the line with a metal pitcher and a stack of tin cups. He poured water, handed a cup to each man. When he reached Klaus, Klaus's hand trembled. A memory rose unbidden. The sandwich at the train station. The lemonade under the oak tree. His brain, still infected with old stories, whispered one last time. This is it. Last day. Now they show you what they really are. He stared at the water. Then, almost as if he needed to test the world one more time before leaving it, he tipped the cup. The water splashed onto the dust at his feet, soaking in instantly, vanishing. The MP blinked. For a second, the yard held its breath. The MP looked at the wet patch, then back at Klaus. His expression didn't harden. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his rifle. He poured another cup, held it out again. Klaus stared at him. Trust's your problem, not mine, the MP said in English. I've got enough to share either way. Klaus didn't know the words, but he understood the gesture. You can't break my hand by breaking your trust. He took the cup. He drank. The water tasted like 1,000 apologies he didn't know how to say. They boarded the trucks. As the convoy rolled through the gates and turned onto the main road, people from the nearby town stood by and watched. No one yelled. No one waved flags. A few lifted their hands in small, stiff gestures that might have been farewells or might have just been habits. A young garage mechanic wiped grease from his hands and spoke to the private beside him as the trucks passed. I don't hate them, he said. I just hope the next generation doesn't have to be this stupid. Klaus caught only fragments through the rattle and dust. He understood enough. The port looked different now than on that first morning in 1943. Same docks, same cranes, same goals. Different Klaus. The ship waiting for them was gray and crowded, built for function, not comfort. The passenger train had been mercy. The ship home was just logistics. As he climbed the gangplank, he heard someone call his name. The camp doctor walked toward him, coat flapping in the sea wind, a thin envelope in his hand. He pressed it into Klaus's palm. For you, the doctor said. What is it? Klaus asked. The doctor smiled faintly. Open it when you remember the worst version of yourself, he said. Read it then. He turned away without waiting for thanks. The ship pulled away from the dock. The coastline shrank. Otto stood at the rail, knuckles white. I thought freedom would feel lighter, Otto said. Maybe it starts heavy, Klaus answered. They watched America recede, the memory of barbed wire and cotton fields and fried chicken in English verbs, blending into one long, impossible story. On the third night at sea, with the Atlantic heaving under his feet and the sky full of indifferent stars, Klaus opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a medical clearance form, stamped and signed. At the bottom under the typed lines, in careful German, the doctor had written, I treated you like a patient, not an enemy. Become the man who deserved it. Klaus folded the paper like something sacred and tucked it into the same pocket as his mother's last letter. 2 weeks later, the ship docked in Bremerhaven. Germany, or what was left of it. The port was a skeleton. Twisted metal, cranes, toppled, warehouses burned out, their walls standing like blackened teeth. The air smelled of ash and cold and the stale breath of too many people. They disembarked into a silence, so thick it muted even the gulls. The train ride to Stuttgart was nothing like the one that had brought him to Camp Herne. Boxcars again. Crowded again. But now the faces around him were all mirror images. Hollow-eyed men in tattered uniforms. Citizens displaced by bombs. Children clinging to anyone who would let them. No one spoke much. There were no sandwiches. No water breaks with kind strangers. Just a bucket in the corner and the sound of tracks grinding under rusted wheels. When he stepped off at the Stuttgart station, he barely recognized the place. Streets he had walked as a teenager were now canyons between piles of rubble. Buildings stood open to the sky, facades torn off, rooms laid bare like dollhouses. A church he remembered from childhood was just a bell half buried in stone. People moved through it all, like ghosts. He walked. His legs felt heavier with every block. He reached the place where his family's apartment building had stood. There was a crater there now. He stood at its edge and felt nothing. For a moment, then too much. A neighbor recognized him, somehow under the uniform and the years. "Your mother is out at your uncle's farm," the man said. 15 kilometers. They're alive. Alive. The word was enough to make him move again. That evening, he stood in the doorway of a low farmhouse, hand raised, knuckles almost touching wood. The door opened. His mother gasped. For a second, she looked at him like he was a ghost from the wrong direction. Then she grabbed him. Her hands clutched his face, his shoulders, his arms, as if testing flesh for solidity. His sister appeared behind her, thinner, older, eyes too large. They held each other in the doorway, three people from a life that had ended and somehow continued. That night, they ate soup, potatoes, carrots, water. Thin. Barely salted, it was the best meal of his life. Not because of the flavor, because of the company. "What was it like?" his sister asked softly as they sat around the small table. "In America, in the camps," he set his spoon down. How could he tell them about beds and fried chicken when their mattress was straw on the floor and their soup was half water? How could he talk about Curtis's lemonade? While they boiled rainwater, he chose carefully. "They treated us like humans," he said at last. "And I learned how to become one." His mother looked at him for a long time. "Then at least something good came from this madness," she said. Years passed. Germany rebuilt, slowly, painfully. Klaus worked in construction, lifting bricks and beams, stacking the future on top of the ruins of the past. Marit. He had children who grew up learning new maps, new borders, new stories. He could have buried Texas with the rest of the war. He didn't. In 1953, he filled out forms. In 1955, he held a visa in his hand. On a bright day that felt unsettlingly like that first morning in Norfolk, he stood on another dock. This time not as a prisoner, but as a man choosing to cross. Curtis Whitfield met him at the Texas station. Older now, slower, a little stooped. But the set of his jaw was the same. "You came back," Curtis said. "I came home," Klaus answered. They shook hands. Not as captor and captive, as two men who had both survived their own illusions. Otto came later, opening a bakery in Houston that smelled of both countries. German bread, baked in American ovens. Friedrich finished his philosophy degree at the University of Texas and taught students who had never seen a bomb fall in their own city. In 1972, when Curtis died, Klaus stood beside his grave. He listened as the pastor spoke about a farmer who had fed enemies in a time of fear, who had chosen decency over rage, who had believed that what you did to those in your power said more about you than any flag. Klaus wept, not because Curtis was perfect, but because Curtis had been kind when the world had given him every excuse not to be. Years later, in a small lecture hall, a student asked Klaus to describe his first day in America. He thought about the dock, the sandwich, the train with seats, the bed, the hot shower. "I expected to be shot," he said. "Instead, I was given a pillow." The student blinked, pen hovering over paper. "What did that change?" she asked. Everything, Klaus said. Fear taught me who to hate. Kindness taught me who I am. I chose the second teacher. It took the rest of my life to pass the exam. Outside, somewhere over Texas, the sun rose on cotton fields and highways, on new houses built where barracks once stood. No one walking there now could see the ghosts of the men who had crossed an ocean expecting monsters and found something stranger. They found people, and on a dock long ago, in August 1943, a German prisoner took his first step onto American soil, braced for hell, and began, without knowing it, the longest lesson of his life.